Picture this. It's the year 1700, and the world is a very different place. Life is simple, the pace is slow, and the rhythm of human existence is governed by the seasons. People live in small villages, working the land by hand, growing their own food, and using tools that have barely changed for centuries. This is the world your great-grandparents would have known, and the world that humans lived in for thousands of years. But something extraordinary is about to happen. A revolution is brewing, one that will change the world in ways that no one could have imagined. It will be a revolution in how people live, work, and think. And it will happen not with the flash of a sword or the roar of battle, but with the hum of machines and the steam of engines. This is the story of the Industrial Revolution, the moment when humanity transitioned from agrarian societies to modern, industrialized nations. In the mid-18th century, Great Britain, an island nation rich in coal and iron, surrounded by navigable rivers and oceans, became the epicenter of this transformation. The winds of change were already blowing, and the world would never be the same. But why did this revolution begin in Britain? And what were the key factors that sparked the birth of the industrial age? Let's take a closer look at the 5 key pillars that allowed Great Britain to lead the world into this new era. The first pillar: agricultural revolution and increased productivity. The first pillar of the Industrial Revolution was already in place before the machines even began to hum. Britain's agricultural revolution, which had begun in the late 17th century, set the stage for what was to come. This was a time when farmers started adopting new methods of crop rotation, selective breeding, and the use of more efficient tools. The result? Far more food was produced with fewer laborers. Increased agricultural productivity freed up a large portion of the population from working the fields. As a result, many people were available to work in factories and mines, where the new machines would soon require a steady supply of labor. Britain's agricultural innovation also created a surplus of food, which meant that the population could grow. For the first time, fewer people were required to grow food, and this surplus of food allowed for a population explosion. Cities began to expand, and with that expansion came the demand for more goods, services, and, eventually, a workforce that could meet this new demand. This agricultural surplus was one of the first sparks that ignited the Industrial Revolution. Without the ability to feed more people with fewer workers, the urbanization that followed would have been impossible. The second pillar: political stability and government support. The second pillar of Britain's industrial supremacy was its political stability and a government that supported entrepreneurship. Unlike many of its European neighbors, Britain had a government that fostered business, protected property rights, and encouraged investment. Britain had been through turbulent times, from the English Civil War to the Glorious Revolution of 1688. But by the 18th century, its political landscape had settled. The British monarchy, under Queen Victoria and earlier monarchs like George III, stabilized the country. The government supported the development of industries by passing laws that protected private property, supported free trade, and encouraged the development of the banking system. The British Parliament also passed laws that encouraged innovation, offering patents to inventors and entrepreneurs, giving them legal protections to profit from their ideas. This allowed entrepreneurs to invest in risky ventures without the fear of losing their intellectual property. The political stability of Britain, coupled with a government that protected business interests, created an environment where innovation could flourish. Britain was open to the changes that would come with industrialization, and its legal system supported the transformation of the economy from agrarian to industrial. The third pillar: geography and natural resources. Britain's geography was another major factor that contributed to its rise as the leader of the Industrial Revolution. As an island nation, Britain had access to abundant natural resources, particularly coal and iron, which were vital for powering the new machines and building the infrastructure that would drive industrial growth. Coal, in particular, was the fuel that powered the engines of the Industrial Revolution. Britain had vast coal reserves, especially in the north of the country, and coal was essential for the steam engines that would revolutionize transportation and manufacturing. The availability of iron ore in Britain allowed for the mass production of metal goods, from steam engines to railroads, and eventually to the tools and machines that would be used in every industry. Britain's navigable rivers and proximity to the sea made transportation easier. Goods could be easily transported by river and sea, which lowered the cost of shipping raw materials to factories and finished products to markets. The fact that Britain was surrounded by water also allowed for easy access to international trade. This created a system where goods could flow freely and the economy could expand rapidly. The fourth pillar: the scientific revolution and a culture of innovation. The scientific revolution of the 17th century also played a key role in the Industrial Revolution. The discoveries of great scientists like Isaac Newton, Robert Boyle, and James Watt laid the intellectual groundwork for technological advancements in the 18th century. A culture of experimentation and scientific inquiry took root in Britain. The Enlightenment encouraged thinking that embraced reason, experimentation, and the application of knowledge to solve practical problems. These ideas led to breakthroughs in engineering, chemistry, and physics, which allowed for the creation of new machines and the improvement of existing technologies. Watt's improvement of the steam engine is perhaps the best example of how scientific advancements were directly linked to industrial growth. Watt's invention of the separate condenser for the steam engine significantly improved its efficiency, making it practical for use in factories, mines, and railways. This culture of innovation, fueled by the ideas of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, created a constant cycle of improvement that pushed Britain to the forefront of industrial progress. New inventions and improvements to existing technologies would come at a rapid pace, forever altering how people lived and worked. The fifth pillar: access to capital and investment. The final pillar of the Industrial Revolution was Britain's ability to mobilize capital for investment. Thanks to the country's growing banking system, merchants and entrepreneurs were able to access the capital they needed to fund the creation of new factories and to invest in technological innovation. In the late 17th and early 18th centuries, Britain developed a sophisticated financial system with banks that provided loans to entrepreneurs, allowing them to expand their operations. The Bank of England, established in 1694, was one of the first central banks and provided a stable financial system that encouraged investment. The availability of cheap capital allowed entrepreneurs to build large factories, fund the development of new machines, and expand their businesses rapidly. Without the ability to access capital, the factories and machines that powered the Industrial Revolution wouldn't have been built. This access to capital allowed Britain's industrial base to grow at an unprecedented rate, enabling the country to dominate global trade and manufacturing. The Industrial Revolution: inventions, urbanization, and social transformation. The birth of new industries and technologies. The Industrial Revolution brought about a wave of technological inventions that radically transformed society. At the heart of this revolution were the machines that powered factories and changed how goods were produced. No longer would things be made by hand, slowly, and one at a time. Now, machines could do the work of hundreds of people, speeding up production and driving mass manufacturing. The first major breakthrough came in the textile industry. In the early 1700s, Britain's textile industry faced stiff competition from India, where textiles were produced much more cheaply. India had long been the world leader in textiles, and their cotton products were of superior quality. But British entrepreneurs, eager to outpace their rivals, sought ways to increase their textile production. And they did so by inventing machines that could spin and weave cotton faster and more efficiently. In 1733, John Kay invented the flying shuttle, a device that allowed weavers to work much faster. However, the demand for thread soon outpaced the supply, and this created a crisis. There wasn't enough thread to keep up with the new technology. In response to this, James Hargreaves invented the spinning jenny in 1764, a machine that allowed a single worker to spin multiple spools of thread simultaneously. This was the first major step toward factory-based production in textiles. But the real breakthrough came with Richard Arkwright, who took the spinning jenny and adapted it to be powered by water. He built the first true cotton mill in 1771, using water wheels to power the machines. Arkwright's mills, larger than anything seen before, marked the shift from small cottage industries to large-scale industrial production. This change was revolutionary. It meant that production could happen on a scale that was previously unimaginable. Steam power, the engine that changed everything. As the textile industry boomed, a new technology emerged that would forever change how humans interacted with machines: the steam engine. Though the basic idea of the steam engine had been around for centuries, it was James Watt who truly unlocked its potential. In 1769, Watt improved on earlier designs by creating a more efficient engine. His engine had a separate condenser, which saved energy and made the engine more practical for use in factories, mines, and eventually, transportation. Watt's invention was the game changer. It provided a constant, reliable source of power that didn't rely on wind, water, or animal muscle. Steam engines allowed factories to be built anywhere, not just near rivers. They powered mining operations, cotton mills, and eventually, railroads. The steam engine was the driving force behind the Industrial Revolution, allowing Britain to scale up production and build massive factories. The rise of railroads, transforming transport and trade. The invention of the steam engine had another profound impact. It paved the way for the railroad. Railways allowed goods and people to move more quickly and efficiently than ever before. This revolutionized trade, travel, and the very fabric of society. The first major steam-powered railway was opened in 1825, running from Stockton to Darlington in northern England. The success of this venture led to the creation of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, which opened in 1830. This was the first truly intercity railway, connecting two of Britain's most important cities, and it became the model for railroads around the world. Railroads had a profound effect on the economy. They made it easier to transport raw materials like coal and iron to factories, while finished goods could be shipped to new markets. Railways also created new job opportunities, both in construction and operation. As the rail network expanded, entire cities grew up around railway stations, and towns that were once isolated became hubs of commerce and industry. The impact of the Industrial Revolution on urbanization. One of the most visible effects of the Industrial Revolution was the rise of urbanization. As factories grew and demanded more workers, people began moving from rural areas to cities in search of jobs. By the mid-1800s, cities like Manchester, Liverpool, and Birmingham were booming. The rise of factories and railways transformed these once small towns into large, bustling industrial centers. This rapid urbanization brought both benefits and challenges. On the positive side, it led to the creation of new industries, jobs, and wealth. Cities became hubs of innovation, culture, and commerce. The spread of industrialization also led to increased production of goods, which made products more affordable and accessible to a broader range of people. However, the rapid growth of cities also brought significant problems. The demand for workers in the factories was so great that entire families, including women and children, were employed in grueling conditions. Workers often labored long hours in dangerous and unsanitary environments for low wages. The cities themselves grew haphazardly, with little thought given to infrastructure or public health. Overcrowded tenements, poor sanitation, and polluted air became a common reality for the working class. Disease spread quickly in these cramped, unsanitary conditions, and life expectancy in industrial cities was far lower than in rural areas. Social changes and the rise of the working class. As cities grew, so did the divide between the working class and the middle and upper classes. The working class consisted of those who worked in factories, mines, and transportation. They were the backbone of the industrial economy, but they lived in poor conditions and had little political power. The middle class, meanwhile, was composed of factory owners, merchants, bankers, and professionals, those who had capital to invest and benefited from the new industrial economy. The middle class began to grow, and its members sought more political influence and greater social status. The growing disparities between these classes led to social tensions. Workers, who often labored under harsh conditions, began to organize for better wages, working conditions, and hours. The rise of labor unions and worker movements became one of the key responses to industrialization. Though these movements were initially repressed, they laid the groundwork for labor laws and workers' rights that would come later in the 19th and 20th centuries. The global impact of the Industrial Revolution. While the Industrial Revolution began in Britain, it quickly spread to other parts of Europe, the United States, and eventually the world. In the 19th century, industrialization transformed countries across the globe. The United States, in particular, saw rapid industrial growth after the Civil War. Cities like New York, Chicago, and Detroit became centers of industrial production, spurred on by innovations in steel, railroads, and machinery. The spread of industrialization also had a profound impact on global trade. The rise of railroads, steamships, and telegraphs connected distant regions of the world, making it easier to trade goods and ideas. This global network of trade and communication led to the rise of global capitalism, as nations increasingly relied on each other for raw materials, finished goods, and markets. However, the spread of industrialization also led to new forms of inequality, both within countries and between them. The exploitation of workers in industrialized countries often relied on the extraction of raw materials from colonies and less developed nations. Industrial powers competed for control of resources and markets, leading to imperialist expansion and the colonization of Africa, Asia, and parts of Latin America. The environmental and social costs of industrialization. While the Industrial Revolution brought immense economic and technological growth, it also had significant environmental and social costs. The increased use of coal and other fossil fuels contributed to pollution and environmental degradation. Factories spewed smoke and chemicals into the air and rivers, and mining operations scarred the landscape. Socially, the Industrial Revolution created a new class of people who lived in cities, working long hours in dangerous conditions for low wages. While the middle and upper classes benefited from the rise of factories, many workers faced harsh living conditions and had limited opportunities for advancement. The working class often lived in cramped, unsanitary conditions in overcrowded urban areas, and disease and poverty were rampant. Despite these hardships, the Industrial Revolution marked the beginning of profound changes that would shape the future of humanity. It opened the door to an age of innovation, mass production, and technological progress that would continue to unfold throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. The legacy of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was a transformative period in human history. It changed the way people lived and worked, shaping the modern world in ways that are still evident today. From the birth of factories and railroads to the rise of the working class and the middle class, industrialization reshaped the social, political, and economic landscape. While the revolution brought immense benefits, it also brought challenges: inequality, environmental degradation, and social unrest. But the innovations and changes of the Industrial Revolution paved the way for the world we live in today. It laid the foundation for modern economies, mass production, and the technological advancements that continue to drive our society forward. As we reflect on the legacy of the Industrial Revolution, we can see how far we have come. But we also need to recognize the challenges it created, many of which we are still working to address today. The Industrial Revolution: legacy, change, and challenges for the modern world. The global spread of industrialization. By the mid-19th century, the ripples of the Industrial Revolution had spread far beyond Britain. Europe and the United States began to follow in Britain's footsteps, harnessing the power of machines and steam engines to revolutionize their economies. The rapid industrialization of Western nations transformed the global economy and changed the way people interacted with the world. In the United States, industrialization took off after the Civil War. Cities like New York, Chicago, and Detroit became key industrial hubs, spurred on by technological advances in steel production, railroads, and machinery. The country was rapidly transitioning from an agrarian economy to an industrial powerhouse. This shift was driven by innovations like Henry Ford's assembly line, which revolutionized the automobile industry and made mass production possible. By the late 19th century, the United States had surpassed Britain in industrial output, marking the country's transition into a global economic leader. The development of railroads, oil industries, and the expansion of steel production were critical to this rise, as was the rise of banking and financial systems that allowed for the funding of these massive industrial projects. However, the global spread of industrialization did not come without its consequences. While industrialized nations flourished, those regions that remained agrarian or underdeveloped were often left behind. This disparity fueled imperialism, as industrial powers sought to secure raw materials and markets in the colonies of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The rush for resources and markets helped create the geopolitical tensions that would shape much of the 20th century. social unrest, and the rise of labor movements. In the midst of rapid industrialization, workers faced increasingly difficult conditions. The explosion of factory jobs and urban growth led to overcrowded cities, poor working conditions, and long hours. The poor and working classes, who were essential to fueling industrial progress, found themselves trapped in harsh environments. Factories were often dark, poorly ventilated, and dangerous, and workers had little power or rights. Women and children, in particular, suffered greatly during the Industrial Revolution. They were often employed in factories and mines, working long hours in dangerous conditions for a fraction of the wages paid to men. Children as young as 6 were employed in cotton mills and coal mines, subjected to brutal labor and exploitation. The stark inequality between the wealthy industrialists and the working class led to widespread social unrest. As the Industrial Revolution progressed, workers began to organize and demand better conditions. Labor unions were formed, and the fight for workers' rights became one of the central movements of the 19th century. One of the key achievements of this period was the rise of labor laws, which eventually led to the regulation of working hours, the banning of child labor, and improvements in wages and safety conditions. The Labour Party in Britain and the American Federation of Labor in the United States were among the key organizations that fought for workers' rights, helping to lay the groundwork for the welfare state and modern labor protections. While progress was slow, the labor movement was instrumental in shaping the modern working conditions that many of us take for granted today. It also sparked a broader movement for social change, as people began to question the fairness and morality of the rapidly growing industrial system. Environmental impact, the price of progress. The Industrial Revolution came with a heavy environmental cost. As factories grew, they burned vast amounts of coal, releasing smoke and pollutants into the air. Cities became choked with smog, rivers became clogged with industrial waste, and the natural landscape was scarred by mining operations and urban sprawl. The exploitation of coal and other natural resources led to environmental degradation that would persist long after the revolution ended. As factories consumed more energy, they also consumed the land. Forests were cleared, rivers were polluted, and air quality deteriorated. In many industrial centers, the once green countryside was replaced with sprawling factories and smokestacks that polluted the environment and created health hazards for workers and residents. One of the most striking examples of the environmental cost of industrialization is the rise of the coal mining industry. In the early days of the Industrial Revolution, coal was the primary fuel for factories, steam engines, and ships. But the extraction of coal came at a steep cost. Miners worked in dangerous conditions, and the environment around mining towns was destroyed. Over time, the coal industry expanded globally, causing long-term damage to ecosystems and contributing to climate change. It wasn't just the environment that paid the price. Human health also suffered. Industrial workers were exposed to dangerous chemicals, toxic fumes, and hazardous working conditions, leading to widespread illness and death. The rapid growth of cities and the lack of sanitation made urban areas breeding grounds for diseases like cholera, typhoid fever, and tuberculosis. The environmental damage and public health crisis created by industrialization were stark reminders that progress came at a heavy price. The Second Industrial Revolution: steel, electricity, and mass production. While the first phase of the Industrial Revolution was driven by coal, textiles, and steam engines, the second industrial revolution, which began in the late 19th century, ushered in a new era of technological breakthroughs. This phase was characterized by the rise of steel production, electricity, and mass production. One of the most transformative innovations of this period was the Bessemer process, developed in the 1850s by Sir Henry Bessemer. This process made steel production cheaper and more efficient, allowing for the mass production of steel, which became essential for the construction of railroads, bridges, skyscrapers, and machinery. The availability of steel made it possible to build larger and more durable structures, fueling the growth of cities and enabling the construction of modern infrastructure. The invention of the electricity revolutionized industries and daily life. Thomas Edison's invention of the light bulb in 1879, followed by the development of electrical power systems, made it possible to light cities, factories, and homes with electricity. This opened up new possibilities for industrial production and personal convenience. Factories could now operate 24/7, and machines powered by electricity replaced steam engines, leading to even more efficient production processes. Mass production. Henry Ford and the assembly line. One of the most iconic inventions of the Second Industrial Revolution was Henry Ford's assembly line. Ford revolutionized manufacturing with his introduction of the moving assembly line in 1913, which allowed for the mass production of automobiles. The Model T became one of the first products to be manufactured using this system, making cars affordable for the average American. Ford's assembly line was a game changer. By breaking down the production process into smaller, repetitive tasks and organizing the assembly line to move the product from worker to worker, Ford drastically reduced production time and costs. This allowed for the mass production of goods, making products more affordable and accessible to the public. The principles of mass production extended beyond automobiles to industries like consumer goods, electronics, and even food production. The assembly line system allowed companies to produce goods quickly and cheaply, fueling the growth of consumer culture in the early 20th century. The long-term impact of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was not just a period of rapid technological innovation. It was a turning point in human history. It transformed the way we lived, worked, and interacted with the world around us. From the birth of factories and railroads to the rise of mass production and global trade, the Industrial Revolution laid the foundation for the modern world. However, the legacy of the Industrial Revolution is complex. While it brought about unprecedented economic growth and technological advancement, it also created social inequality, environmental damage, and public health crises. The challenges that arose during the Industrial Revolution, working conditions, social unrest, and environmental degradation, are still with us today. As we look back on the Industrial Revolution, we must recognize both its triumphs and its costs. The revolution sparked a new era of innovation and growth, but it also serves as a reminder of the importance of balancing progress with sustainability and equity. The lessons of the Industrial Revolution continue to shape our world as we navigate the challenges of the 21st century.